Hello, this is Bertie, and I'm here with the next part of the histories of Herodotus. And this story is dedicated to Charlie Taylor. This story starts in a country that doesn't exist anymore. In its time, it was as important as ancient Egypt or Babylon, and it was famous for its wealth, particularly the gold that came from its rivers. In fact, Herodotus says it was the first place to use gold and silver coins, and to open shops. This country was called Lydia, and it was located in the part of the world we now call Turkey, which is where Europe ends and Asia begins. Herodotus tells us that the first kings of Lydia were the family of Heracles. As you probably know, Heracles was the Greek strongman and hero who had to complete 12 impossible tasks. We have that tale on Story Nori, filed under myths. Well, one of these Lydian kings, supposedly something like the great-great-great-great-grandchild of Heracles, was called Candaules. Some people say that his name meant the dog strangler. But you will be pleased to know that I haven't found any stories about Candaules strangling dogs. Candaules' best friend was his bodyguard called Gyges. And one time this Gyges caught sight of the Queen of Lydia in the nude. The Queen was embarrassed and angry, and she gave Gyges a choice. Either she would order him to be executed, or he could murder King Candaules and marry her. It was one of those choices that wasn't really much of a choice. So he duly killed King Candaules, married the queen, and became king in Candaules' place. And that's the story of how Gyges became king of Lydia, as told by Herodotus, more or less. But I'm going to quickly give you another version of this story, and this version is more like a fairy tale. According to Plato, the Greek philosopher, Gyges was actually a shepherd who found a magic ring that made him invisible when he put it on. He used this power of invisibility to help him murder King Candaules and to marry his wife and to take his place as king. And Plato asks a question that's a bit like this. Supposing you had a magic ring and could use it to make yourself invisible. You could get away with doing anything you liked, even if it was bad. For instance, you could walk into a shop completely invisible and just steal anything you wanted. Would you be tempted? In other words, do we only behave well because we're afraid of being caught and punished? Or are some people just good anyway? Well, that's just something to think about, especially when we hear stories about powerful people, including kings and queens and the rulers that the Greeks called tyrants, who were so powerful and didn't need to fear the law and could actually do whatever they wanted. Would they use that power for good or evil? It's really a big question in history. Gyges murdered Candaules and made himself king of Lydia about 718 years before the birth of Christ. And the people of Lydia were not happy about this, because they thought that if the gods punished Gyges for his crimes, they might also punish all the people of Lydia too. Gyges had to prove that the gods wanted him to be king. And this is when Lydia began its expensive custom of consulting the Greek oracles. So, what was an oracle? Well, it was usually a priestess who claimed that she could ask the gods questions about anything, including the future, and get answers. Lots of people believed in the power of oracles and were prepared to pay good gold for their services. The richest and most famous oracle was in a place called Delphi, on the slopes of Mount Parnassus in central Greece. The high priestess of Delphi was called the Pythia, and she was said to be in touch with Apollo, god of the sun and music. Gyges sent a messenger to Delphi to receive the wisdom of the Pythia. She replied that Gyges' family would be firm rulers of Lydia for 5 generations, but then the family of Heracles would get their revenge. So Gyges was secure. Herodotus says that nobody paid any attention to the warning about the distant future until it came true. Gyges rewarded the oracle with many precious gifts, including 6 great golden bowls, which Herodotus saw when he visited Delphi about 200 years later. But by that time the empire of Lydia no longer existed. But the family of Gyges did rule for 5 generations, and there are more stories to tell you about them, including how they continued to put their faith in the Greek oracle of Delphi. And there is one prediction that I made that I have to admit I got wrong. Last time I said that the next story was going to be about a king who was so rich that he thought he must be the happiest person alive. As it turns out, it's going to take me a little longer to get round to telling his story, but we will get there fairly soon. And I am delighted to dedicate this story from Herodotus to Charlie Taylor, who is 7 years old and lives in Sydney, Australia. His mother Jenny tells us that they listened to both our version of Herodotus and the original histories on Audible. And I would like to thank Charlie and Jenny for becoming our latest supporters on Patreon. It means the world to us to receive help from our listeners. Before I go, I'd just like to tell you a little bit more about Story Nori. I know many of you come to us via the podcast, via an app. And you may not be aware that, unlike many podcasts that don't really have much of a website, we actually have a big website with a huge archive of free audio material going all the way back to 2005. And we've done our best to organise this so that you can easily browse your favourite stories. If you're 13 or older, you can also follow us on Facebook or Twitter. Lots of adults follow us there. And we have a new Instagram account. Just search Instagram for Story Nori. So thank you very much for listening. From me, Bertie, at storynori.com. Until next time, goodbye.